Welcome everyone to Starting Point's education channel. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We're so excited. We have Melissa Yaeger as our guest counselor that will be talking about what you say to yourself matters. And it's really fun when I was talking to Melissa about this topic, and I am Loretta Depka from the Starting Point. She said that she really appreciates cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy, and that's how we're going to talk about it all. So let me introduce Melissa first. She is a licensed professional counselor with us here at the Starting Point. She also has been here, how many years, Melissa? She interned with us, so.
Right, so since 2013 of September,
Okay.
September 2013.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, and we intend to keep her forever, so. And she treats all kinds of areas, depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, substance abuse, personality disorders, and grief. Melissa is accessible to those who simply need someone to talk to during a difficult time. I think, Melissa, is it fair to say that the majority of your practice are teens and young adults?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you work with adults also? I mean, older adults?
I do. Yeah,
Oh.
I definitely do if they reach out, but the majority of the people who reach out are teens or young adults.
Okay.
Well, teens' parents, not the actual teen.
Is there anything else you would like people to know about you before we start?
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, so let's begin. Why does what you say to yourself matter?
So, in the long and short of it, we spend the most time with ourselves if we really think about it. And when I say with ourselves, I mean with our inner self voice or self critic, as some people might call it. So, if we're constantly talking negative to ourselves, that's not going to be a very good time. We're going to feel probably pretty down, pretty angry, pretty sad, lots of negative things if we're constantly talking negative to ourselves. I kind of encourage my clients to think about the idea of if we had a roommate who constantly talked to us the way that we talk to ourselves in our head, we would probably be, well, hopefully we would tell them to stop, but we would probably be very angry with them and very upset or very kind of taking it personal, putting ourselves down. So trying to think of it that way, that if we wouldn't let anyone else do that to us, why do we let ourselves do that to ourselves?
Melissa, how do we learn that? I mean, is that just a natural, do we naturally, we're our worst critics?
Well, there is some school of thought that says our minds naturally go negative in a kind of like evolutionary kind of thing. Like we do that in order to survive. We need to be able to think of the worst case scenario. But I think for some of us, our minds take it to the next level. It's like, okay, now I'm thinking way too extra negative. I don't need to be thinking this terrible about everything. I'm not prepping myself for anything. I'm just thinking poorly about ourselves. So I think a lot of us don't even realize that. We just think, oh, I'm just a negative person and there's nothing I can do about it. But really, it's kind of part of our genetic makeup. But knowing that, we can learn to work with that instead of like thinking that it's just something we're bound to have or be forever.
So tell me, how do we talk nice to ourselves? That sounds like a lot of work.
It can be, because half the time we don't even realize we're doing it. Half the time we're just feeling bad or feeling stuck in a rut or whatever way you want to say it, and we don't realize that a lot of it is just the way that we're talking to ourselves and making ourselves feel. So I always say step one has to be awareness. You have to become aware of your negative self-talk and of your negative thinking in order to be able to change anything.
You know, what strikes me, I remember all the books about positive thinking, and can you take positive thinking too far?
Definitely. There is such a thing as like toxic positivity. Um, because I do think we have to acknowledge like negative things or negative thinking or whatever. We have to give it some time, but we don't have to stay there. That's what I always say to my clients is like, we can give it some acknowledgement, we can give it some time, but we do not have to stay there. And that's really where the positive or neutral thinking too, as I like to say. But there is definitely taking positivity too far. And that would mainly just be like not acknowledging anything bad or negative, brushing off anything that's sad or whatever kind of word you could associate with negativity. It would just kind of be brushing all of that off and not pretending that it doesn't exist, which it does. Like negative things do exist. So we have to acknowledge them and give them some time.
So why don't you define cognitive behavioral therapy for us? Because I'm afraid we all just assume it's positive thinking, right? That's the
Yeah.
mistake we make.
And I think that's a fair assumption. And like you said, I think that's what a lot of people think, that it's just about that. But really, cognitive behavioral therapy, and not to give the wordy definition, but basically it's just learning how our mind and our thoughts change and create our behavior, or affect and create our behavior. So just our mind and thoughts influencing the way that we behave.
So then what about those sort of, what role, I guess, when you're working with clients on CBT, is it just about your current issues, or does it encompass your past, and where do you start, I guess, is the real question.
So traditional CBT, or classically trained CBT therapists, as I like to say, which I'm not classically trained. I utilize the skills, but I don't have a certificate in CBT. You can practice it without it, but there are counselors who go above and beyond and get fully certified in it. So a traditional CBT therapist would stay totally present centered. So it would be called more like solution focused or solution based counseling, where you just focus on current things that the client is going through, current struggles they're having, symptoms they're currently having. A CBT therapist could go into past stuff if they felt like it was relevant to the current stuff that kept coming up, but usually they would stay present focused and present based. So you would talk about kind of what the client went through that week or that day. And then each time they came back, you'd focus specifically on that week or that day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All I can think about is years ago, I worked with David Burns. He was at my hospital, and his perfectionism. So I'm just thinking, all of it, I can still hear him about perfectionism. So tell me, because I think that's interesting, that the perfectionist piece that you would work on.
Yeah. So meaning like how you would kind of battle those thoughts of perfection or perfectionism. So again, first step kind of being awareness being the key to starting it all. But then kind of from the awareness, taking the thoughts of your perfectionist type of thoughts and changing them into something more realistic, or challenging them to say, well, is that really realistic, or is that really valid? Or do I have evidence to support that? Typically the answers are no. So then we come up with an alternative thought of like, okay, I don't need to be perfect. No one's telling me I have to be perfect in this example. So that would kind of be sort of the step-by-step process you would maybe have done for that.
Can you do the same thing sort of with the positive thinking, another way of going over? All I can think of is the old example of, oh, you're a Pollyanna. So it's like, I'm just wondering, for those that try to stay upbeat and believe in positive thinking, where's the balance?
I think it's different per person. I think the positive thinking comes into play when you're challenging the negative thought, because usually the negative thought is automatic. So you have to challenge it and then insert the positive thought. But I think for some situations, maybe when we're first starting out doing cognitive behavioral therapy or learning the skills, it might be less positive thinking and more neutral thinking. Because let's say I constantly walk around telling myself that I'm ugly or whatever other negative thing, it's going to be hard for me to go from I'm ugly to I'm beautiful. I have to kind of transition somewhere in between those two of like, oh, I'm not ugly. I look okay. Like I look decent or I look somewhat okay, to then being transitioning to beautiful or thinking super positive like that. Because I think the thing with positive thinking, why some people feel discouraged by it, is that it's hard to buy into or believe, especially if we've been thinking so negative for so long. So I guess the balance is like knowing that at first you may find it tough to be super positive, but that's okay. You can transition yourself and work yourself up to that.
Are there other skills when you're treating someone that you use from cognitive behavior?
A main one is thought tracking. So, and this kind of goes back to the first point of people needing to become aware of their thoughts. So just really getting them to write down the thoughts they have throughout a day. Obviously not all of them, because that would be a lot, because we do have a lot of thoughts per day. But just mainly the most negative ones they have throughout a day. So basically the thought record just says, what were you doing? What was the thought? How did you feel? And then as you get more into it, the thought record will expand and it'll say, okay, well, what's a thought you could have differently? What's an alternative thought you could have? Or things like that. So mainly a thought record is the biggest thing that goes along with it. There is usually homework, which would be the thought record that clients would do, which I don't call it homework. I call it a challenge. I give them a challenge to do throughout the week, which would be just fill out your thought record like once a day or twice a day or something like that.
And then as you're working through this, because you're really reteaching yourself, correct? You're trying to get your mind. So if you decide on a statement, a replacement statement, I guess is the question. Is there like how many times you have to practice it? How many times you have to say it? I guess that Vince would be saying, here's the codependent in me. How am I going to do this? Right, Vince?
You are definitely right. It takes lots and lots of practice because it is a skill. And just like any skill that we try to learn, we do have to do it over and over. But that's not a bad thing if we have to put that thought, replacement thought, as you said, which is a perfect way to say it. It's not a bad thing if we have to constantly do it. The growing or the strength part of that is that we're doing it. Like that's what matters, because before we wouldn't be doing it. We would just be having this thought and letting it go and living with it. But now we're challenging it and we're saying this new thought to ourselves over and over again. So that's really where the growth is happening.
I'm thinking about it in relationship to one of the things that I know you treat, and that is eating disorders. I imagine this can be powerful, but that you're also trying to break really tough thoughts. Correct?
Yeah, definitely. And with eating disorders specifically would be one where I would definitely kind of put the CBT on hold a little bit to get more into the past of the person, of the client I'm seeing, just because a lot of the thoughts that are fueling them now probably come from past experiences. So it would almost be a disservice to not talk about that stuff for them, because it would almost be like we're ignoring it. So specifically with eating disorder clients and clients who've gone through trauma in the past or really big things in their past, we definitely have to give that time and space before we get into the skills side of CBT.
I imagine CBT is great with young people. And I'm telling you, just hearing you talk, I'm thinking, I wish I learned some of these techniques when I was younger.
Yeah, I mean, CBT is cool because it is versatile among any age group. It's easy to learn, it's easy to incorporate, so that's what makes it really applicable to a lot of different client populations. But I think sometimes for younger clients, they may not admit it, but they like having something concrete sort of to work with. I know it's not concrete because I'm not giving them anything physical, but I think they like more of the, like, okay, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I've been challenged to do, so I know what to do. I guess you could call it the structure of it. They seem to like the structure of it rather than, okay, this is abstract, or what do I do with this kind of time in therapy?
And is it true you can teach old dogs new tricks so the older population can also adapt?
If they want to put in the time and effort, because like we said before, it is a skill, so it does take practice. But if anyone wants to make a change, they can. It's just going to take time, and they just have to know that. But putting in the time and effort, they can easily make the change.
Okay, so can you just give us a couple examples of how you would convert a negative thought into a positive thought? I know you used the one, but I'm thinking, you know, from beginning to end, how you would work through a negative thought.
Mm-hmm. So typically negative thoughts will start after something happens. So after a situation, or after someone says something to us, or something like that. They're not typically just there just because. So usually something will spark the negative thought, like, oh, I looked at myself in the mirror, or someone said something nasty to me, or someone made a face at me. So let's start with a situation, which an example here could be someone gave me a dirty look outside when I passed them. So I might think in my head automatically, well, that person hates me. Like, they gave me a dirty look, they hate me. But if I was utilizing CBT, I would say, okay, wait, let me stop, take a pause. Now, what evidence do I have to support that this person hates me? Okay, they gave me a dirty look. All right, that's one side. But other than that, I don't really have any evidence to say that they hate me. So what's the evidence against that? So why do they not hate me? One, they don't know me. I have never seen them before. I've never interacted with them before. And two, they could just be kind of having a bad day or something like that. Which that would kind of be like, okay, well, what could I think alternatively as to they hate me? So using my evidence for and against, I would say, okay, well, it seems like there's more evidence against them hating me, so maybe they're just having a bad day. And then that's the thought I would take with me. So it's more directed back to them rather than directing it on me, like, oh, they hate me. There's something about me that they dislike.
I like that. That's really interesting because it's true. You know,
Uh-huh.
that's a typical scenario too in work sometimes. Somebody just
Mhm.
gives you a dirty look and they didn't see you, or they're busy, or a
Mhm.
thousand different reasons, but we have to convince ourselves of that.
Exactly. But like I said, even just taking the moment to pause and think about it instead of just accepting the first initial thought we have, which is, oh, they hate me, or oh, whatever else, I think that's where the power really happens, because we're just taking a second to say, wait a minute, mind, this isn't okay. Like, you're not going to make me think negatively about myself, especially if I haven't done anything, or especially if I don't even know this person, or whatever the situation entails.
I'm really fascinated by the whole idea of talking to your mind. You know, most people say talking to yourself is a bad sign, but I'm hearing you say it's a great sign. So nobody can yell at me in work when I'm talking to myself, right? I'm doing the right thing as long as it's a positive thought.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Well, and I think you're right. I don't think that is more well known or accepted, or I don't know what the correct wording would be, but I think we think, oh, if I'm thinking to myself or talking to myself, I must be going crazy. But really, it's like we need to, because sometimes our mind throws some really negative stuff at us, and it's not, why should we have to accept it?
And where does that come from, Melissa, those bad thoughts?
Well, kind of again, back to the evolutionary sort of stuff, somewhat related to that. And like I said, that's one school of thought that we've been wired to be negative because of that. Obviously, other stuff would be things we've gone through in our childhood or adult life, things we've internalized from either parents or guardians or friends, schoolmates, things like that. So a lot of it is just triggered by that kind of thing. And I always say, it's usually our mind doing what it's supposed to do, because our brain is supposed to make connections to things, but sometimes it does it too well, where it's sending us a connection of a negative thought of something that happened 10 years ago that we're still thinking about. So it's doing what it's supposed to do, but it's doing it too well that it's like, why do I need to be thinking that thought now when I'm way past it, or when I don't even know that person anymore, or something like that?
You know, it's interesting when you're saying this. What strikes me is, does it allow us to let go of some of those past hurts by just strictly talking to ourselves differently?
Somewhat. Yeah, I think it allows us to acknowledge those past hurts differently, maybe in a different way where we're not internalizing it and putting it on ourselves, but more so we're trying to see maybe where that person was coming from, if it's the person involved, or we're just trying to look at the situation differently to try and understand it from a different angle instead of, oh, what was it about me that caused this bad thing to happen to me? So kind of looking at it instead of maybe what else was going on.
Have you seen it not work with certain people?
Uh, I wouldn't say not work. I would just say that some people just aren't, I don't want to say aren't ready, but again, it's a skill and it does take time. It does take effort. So I think sometimes people, well, a lot of times people come to counseling and think, oh, the counselor has all the answers. They have a magic wand and they're going to fix me. But that's not the case. I don't do that. So I think if people are looking for a quick fix or um, a quick answer on things, it's not going to work for them. But that doesn't mean it's not eventually going to work for them. They're just not at the point where they have fully accepted that, okay, this is going to take time, this is going to take effort, it's not just a quick fix. So I think those people, it would be a little more challenging for.
Are there other problem-solving skills that you use with CBT, or does CBT have them?
There are a lot of different facets to it, I guess you could say. A lot of it is just teaching clients about the different kinds of thinking that they may be doing, like dichotomous thinking, which would be thinking either black or white, catastrophizing, which would be like making everything into the worst case scenarios, those kinds of things. So it's really teaching them about the different, I guess, the different negative thoughts that we can have and how we can identify them as that instead of, and again, them just being, oh, this negative thought that I have to believe. So kind of just calling them out for what they are.
Is there other pieces of information you'd like to share with us about CBT? Or, you know, you just mentioned something else about therapy, that it's not coming to the counselor for all of the answers and making sure the counselor is doing all of the work. Um, can you give people advice when they're, you know, looking for a therapist, and maybe specifically for a CPT therapist, but what are the things that they should be looking? Can you just not have chemistry?
Oh, totally, totally, totally.
Okay.
And I always say when someone new is starting out with me that this is about them. This isn't about me. So if anything isn't working for them, or if they're not feeling it or anything like that, like, please tell me, please say something or email me or whatever, because it really is about them feeling comfortable and feeling okay. And sometimes you just don't, I say vibe with the person, but it's true. We just don't vibe with everyone, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong. It doesn't mean they're doing something wrong. It's just we're just not connecting, and that's totally fine. But I think for people who are looking to start into therapy or who are looking for a therapist, I would just say that you have every right to ask as many questions as you want. You have every right to, obviously, personal questions the therapist won't answer, but in terms of their therapeutic style and their practice, you have every right to ask any question you want to ask. And you also have every right to say, like, hey, this doesn't make me feel comfortable, or hey, I don't feel okay about this, or hey, I've heard about this skill called CBT. Like, do you do that? Is that something we can do here? If not, can you point me in the direction of where I can do that? So kind of just almost like taking a little bit of control of your time in therapy, because again, it is about you as the client and you getting what you need.
I really like that, Melissa. We're going to have to do another one on how to communicate with your practitioner.
Yes.
Because I do think it's true. I think it matters who
Mhm,
you are.
mhm.
Did we miss anything, Melissa, that you'd like to add?
Um, I don't think so. I guess the biggest thing is just knowing, like you kind of said it earlier, CBT is very easy to understand and grasp. Hopefully, we've explained that pretty well today. But knowing that it will take time, it does take effort. And just like any skill or any new thing we try to do, like we do just have to put in some time before we may see some of the benefits or some of the changes.
Well, I cannot thank you enough, Melissa, for joining us tonight. If you've liked what you hear on this podcast, please consider donating to the Starting Point. We have one more before our summer break coming up next week, where our founder, Vince DiPasqua, will talk about applying the steps to your daily life. And we're really looking forward to that one. It will be next Thursday at 6 p.m. Thank you again from the Starting Point. And Melissa, thank you. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.